Hi, I'm Bryan Strawser, Principal and Chief Executive here at Bryghtpath, and welcome to our video, What is Crisis Management? A complete guide for business leaders. In this video, I'll be explaining crisis management, how it works inside of an organization, and how we at Bryghtpath might be able to help you with your crisis management program. Here at Bryghtpath, we work with the world's leading brands to strategically manage uncertainty and disruption. We are globally recognized experts in business continuity, crisis management, and IT disaster recovery. My background, I've spent nearly 25 years in crisis management, business continuity, crisis communications, and IT disaster recovery. I've led the development and implementation of dozens of crisis and emergency management programs at Fortune 500 organizations, government organizations, and nonprofits throughout the world, and I hold multiple professional certifications in business continuity, corporate and physical security, and emergency management. I have an MBA from the University of Minnesota, a master's in international relations from King's College London, and I'm currently a doctoral student at Hamline University here in Minnesota. So when we're talking about a crisis, we're really talking about a critical event that might impact your organization's profitability, your reputation, or your ability to operate. We're talking about an acute event that is really disrupting that capability that you have to operate as an organization, your reputation in the marketplace, or your ability to operate as a company. It can come from a number of different types of events. It could be a supply chain disruption, perhaps a disruption to raw materials provider, to a shipping port, as you see here. It could be something like a terrorist attack, as we saw at the Boston Marathon bombing over a decade ago. It could be a factory disruption, as we see in this incident. I believe this was in Bangladesh many years ago. It could be a flood in a warehouse, in a distribution center, or part of your supply chain. The point is that crisis situations happen to all kinds of organizations, all sizes of organizations, and come from all kinds of different directions, and can even be electronic in nature, can be caused by a cyber attack, a cyber extortion attack, or a ransomware incident, as we've seen in more recent years. When we think about a crisis, we think about different severities of crises that impact your organization. This is a way that we typically start to think about the severity of a crisis. And you think about, too, in your organization, that what is a big deal lower in your organization, say at a store if you're a retailer, or at a specific manufacturing site if you're a manufacturing organization. What's a big deal locally may not be a big deal to you at an enterprise level. This type of thinking about severity and scope gives you an indication about things that really are, give you an idea of things that really are a corporate crisis or an enterprise scale crisis, as opposed to something you're really managing as a routine incident or event. And as things grow in size and severity and scope, they become a bigger disruption to the organization, and they require more coordination and more significant resources to manage that disruption across the organization. And that's why we think that companies need organized crisis management capabilities in order to manage these situations and recover from them promptly so that you can continue your business operations. Now, when you're a leader inside of an organization and you're going through a major crisis, what is it that you would see that would tell you that this crisis was being managed successfully? Well, there are some certain things that we would look for in terms of structure and response and recovery efforts that would tell us that this company was well organized from a crisis management perspective. And so good crisis management has some very consistent characteristics. Here's what those are. First, that there's a rapid response. And there's a rapid response. That company can move quickly because there is a defined process in place that they can follow. There's a clear path of escalation for this crisis. They have decided and defined as a company what is a crisis, how does it get reported, and how does that crisis management process get activated. They have defined as an organization clear roles and responsibilities across the organization, and they have established a team or teams that have crisis management roles and responsibilities. Bigger organizations tend to have a little more complex of a crisis management structure because they might have local or regional or even national level crisis teams leading up to an enterprise scale team, if that makes sense. They have strong cross-functional coordination that is set up in a way to cut across the silos in an organization. Silos are deadly to crisis management. You have to have cross-organizational crisis management teams that cut across that. You have to have appropriate cross-organizational representation on crisis management teams, and you have to have leaders that are leading that crisis capability who model good cross-organizational leadership. You cannot solve a crisis in one silo in the organization. Good crisis management involves effective crisis communication. It involves effective crisis communication in two ways. First, that the company itself has good, what we would think of as good operational crisis communication, meaning that they have established a single source of truth for what is going on with the crisis inside of the company. That this crisis management process is providing good situational updates for what is happening, and they're providing a place for people to go inside of the company with questions so that there's not a rumor mill, so that there's not a constant swirl of communication outside of those more official updates inside of the company. And second, that they have really thought through how to template their external facing communication products, and that they have rapidly deployable crisis messaging that allows them to get ahead of a reputational issue and stay ahead of social media messaging and press messaging so that they can effectively communicate the company's message to all of the outside interested parties, including the media and the local community and the investment community that are necessary in a big crisis. Lastly, when the crisis is over, good crisis management looks like an effective after-action process that the organization learns from each crisis, and they undertake actions to get better, learning from that crisis, that they take actions to get better so that next time they make new original mistakes instead of repeating the same mistakes they did last time. So this is to us here at Bryghtpath, this is what good crisis management looks like. A rapid, clearly understood response with strong cross-functional coordination, effective crisis communications, and you learn from every crisis. Now, we believe in strong crisis management frameworks that let you deal with any crisis, no matter what the scenario is that you get hit with. We think of these as crisis management frameworks that give you the flexibility to deal with any scenario that you're hit with. This crisis framework it clarifies a communication and decision-making framework for any type of crisis event. It gives you that clear roles and responsibilities for all of your stakeholders. It clarifies leadership roles, has good cross-organizational representation for a crisis management team, and then you build scenario-specific annexes for your anticipated risks. What I mean by a crisis framework is some type of one-page view that is easily understandable by the leaders in your organization that this is how we will manage a crisis. And then you write the plan to align with the framework that you have created. Now, this is a very simplified crisis management framework. I'm going to walk you through this from top to bottom to kind of illustrate this. This is, again, a very simple one. Down the bottom, you have some different types of incidents. An operational disruption, an IT disruption, a reputational issue, a security issue, a financial incident like a liquidity problem, or a cyber incident. You have someone in the organization that has the authority to activate this process. In the middle, you have a corporate crisis management team, or a CMT. This team is led by two people. The responsible executive, who is a member of the executive team in this organization, so a direct report of the CEO. Their job is to make decisions within that crisis management team. It's to get them to a decision, to be decisive in this. And then they're one of the two folks that are the conduit of communication up to the CEO and the executive team or executive staff. The incident leader is more of the subject matter expert, might be the director of crisis management or business continuity. Maybe it's the chief security officer or the chief information security officer in the organization. They're kind of managing the process here. Their job is to be the person behind the scenes, keeping the process on track. They're making sure that the situational updates are going out. They're making sure the trains run on time, because the responsible executive is not going to do that. Together, they're managing this overall process, and they're the conduit of escalation and communication to the executives. The CEO and executive staff, they have certain decision-making authority reserved to them. They're not directly involved in this crisis in most cases. Sometimes in smaller organizations they are, but typically they're managing the reputational campaign. They're making certain decisions around the commitment of capital and expense. And they might be involved in some decisions around perhaps a ransomware payment or some large-scale decisions that in our plan we have reserved to their decision-making authority, because that's what we've decided in the planning process, right? But the conduit of communication to them is the responsible executive and the incident leader. Then, of course, you have the board of directors. The board's role, of course, is governance. The conduit of communication to them is how your executives normally communicate to them, which is likely your CEO and the secretary, which is often the general counsel, or sometimes you have a different executive who has that role. But this is a simplified crisis management framework, but it gives you the idea of setting up this structure so that you have a consistent way in which you are managing any crisis situation. And then it doesn't matter how you found yourself in a crisis, you're going to manage it in the same way. And then you work on some scenario-specific plans to manage, say, a cybersecurity incident, a natural disaster, an active assailant, a reputational issue, or food recall, whatever those specific scenarios are. Of course, any crisis has a life cycle, and there's some different ways of laying this out, but we often think about that we are always monitoring things that are happening. Your IT team is monitoring systems. Your security team might be monitoring physical security threats and geopolitical issues. Your supply chain team might be monitoring the availability of raw materials and the shipping and logistics going on with those. Your manufacturing team might be monitoring your manufacturing lines to kind of get the idea. There are alerts that go on all the time that tell you when things are abnormal. You're always assessing those, but sometimes things go really wrong. And that's where you're evaluating those against your triggers, your activation, or your triggers and your thresholds for activating as a crisis. That puts you in your crisis mode. Then you start managing that crisis. You're constantly assessing where you're at. You may be escalating to a more serious crisis level. And then ultimately you get to where it's no longer a crisis and you start to move towards closing out of the crisis and then conducting your after action process. But that's the life cycle of a crisis. And along the way here, you have different actions that you are taking as a part of your crisis management plan. And that's how we think about moving through the life cycle of that crisis process. Of course, all of this involves a lot of programmatic details from a crisis management perspective. You have your plan, you have your policy for crisis management, you have your specific crisis management plan. That includes things like your call agendas you would use with your crisis management team. You want to make sure that plan integrates with things like business continuity plans, IT incident management, your cybersecurity plans, IT disaster plans, and you may have other plans as well. You want checklists, role-specific checklists for folks that are on your crisis management team. So really each functional area represented on your team should have a checklist for that role. You want templated operational communications to tell people you've activated the process, a template for situational briefing, update, a template for executive briefing, a template for deactivation. And then again, you may want to create scenario-specific annexes that fit in with your plan for things like active assailant, cyber extortion and ransomware, natural disaster, or others. All of these, you can kind of scale these up or down based on the size and scope of your organization and the complexity of the threats and risks that you are faced with. Smaller companies, you would do a streamlined version of this. Larger companies, you may invest in more of this to deal with the risks that you're faced with. The point is that you need the right level of planning for the challenges that you're faced with as an organization. And then, of course, you want to support and maintain your program for the long term. You should have some kind of regular program reviews, usually on an annual basis, to make sure things are current, that your checklists are right, that your documentation is up to date, your contact lists are up to date. You should hold some regular meetings of your crisis management team to make sure that folks are current on current threats and challenges going on throughout the organization. You should practice once or twice a year at a minimum to make sure the team is comfortable and confident in their roles as a part of the crisis management team. And then make sure you're providing an update to your executives and your board at least once annually. This allows you to have a good, documented, sustainable program for crisis management in your organization. There are, of course, industry standards that you can look at for business continuity and crisis management. The most commonly accepted standards are the ISO standards. So there is a newer ISO standard for crisis management, ISO 22361. That is out there. That's the one that we would likely recommend that you take a look at. Again, these standards are not prescriptive. They do a pretty good job of laying out, here are some things to think about. I would encourage you to look at it as a guide and then scale it appropriately to what you need for your company. Again, large, complex organizations, you need more of this. Smaller organizations, you need to be nimble and stick to the basics to make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself with documentation and things that you simply may not need to be successful in a crisis. You want to stick to nimble and agile. There are regulatory frameworks if you're in financial services, the FFIEC standards. If you're in healthcare, the Joint Commission standards are worth looking at. If you're a government agency, look at the continuity guidance circulars from FEMA, and the U.S. federal continuity directives are the things you'll want to look at. From a cybersecurity standpoint, of course, the NIST contingency planning and the NIST cybersecurity frameworks are there. And then if your organization follows some of the healthcare or payment industry compliance frameworks, High Trust, Direct Trust, ENAC, and PCI also have some crisis management elements, sometimes referred to as incident management, that you would need to take a look at as well. Now, there's a lot of places here where we can help you here at Bryghtpath. The first is our resiliency diagnosis methodology. This is our proprietary method of how we do a review of your current crisis management, business continuity, or IT disaster recovery program. We would review your current program using the ISO standard approach. We would compare this to the ISO standard and our experience in building and evaluating programs. We would create a detailed evaluation report with our observations, recommendations, and a roadmap for implementation and maturity to help you improve your program. You would leave there understanding exactly where you stand, and then we would present those findings to your executives and others in the organization. Of course, we can also help you improve your program or establish a new program through program development for all of those areas. We can help you build a customized crisis management program that best fits the needs of your organization and guide that all the way through implementation with your team. But if you're just looking to, do this yourself, we sell our crisis management templates, the same material that we would typically start with in those kind of efforts, and you can work on just putting that together yourself as well. If exercises is what you're after, we develop, facilitate, and evaluate tabletop and simulation exercises where we build, conduct, and evaluate those exercises and provide a detailed after-action report with our observations and recommendations, and then present those to your team with recommendations for improvement. And then lastly, we provide managed services where you can outsource your crisis management program to us. We do this for a number of organizations today, including healthcare technology, health insurers, and QSR restaurant chains, and more. So those are some ways in which we can help you with your crisis program. If you want to learn more about crisis management, go to the link in this video video description rather, and visit our ultimate guide to crisis management, which will take you to a summary of a lot of detail about crisis management, many of our more detailed articles and resources on our website, all of which are free, that talk more in depth about crisis management and a lot of our thoughts about how to build, implement, manage, and evaluate crisis management programs in your organization. If I can help you in any way, you can contact me at the email address here on the screen or give me a call at 612-235-6435. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time today. Be well.